for a world of pain.
Spider-Man Web of Shadows is one of those amazing titles that unfortunately has a pretty lackluster PC port. But due to the current landscape of emulators, it opens up 3 ways to play this on PC. The goal of this series is to take older games and bring them into the modern era by figuring out what versions, mods, settings and emulators that we need in order to get the most definitive experience. So whether this is going to be your first ever playthrough of the game or you're looking to re-experience it and play it again, then you're in the right place. We'll be going over the PC, Xbox 360 and PS3 ports, seeing how all of these run on PC, and then at the end going over pros and cons of each and which one you should go with depending on your preference and specs. So let's explore this game and answer the question, what is the best way to play Spider-Man Web of Shadows? Before we get into that though, I need to thank the sponsor of this video, Instant Gaming. Instant Gaming is a website that sells digital games with massive discounts across all platforms such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox and Nintendo. What sets Instant Gaming apart is that it's not a marketplace, and therefore games are directly sourced from authorized resellers. This means that you never have to worry about a dodgy game key that doesn't work. They have a crazy amount of good deals on their website, but one I would like to highlight is Marvel's Spider-Man 2 on Steam. As of writing the script, this game was released yesterday and has already seen a reduction from $62 down to $47.96. It's also my go-to place for buying retro games because the prices are practically a Steam sale all year round. Like the original Resident Evil for example is only $3.29, Fallout New Vegas for £1.96 and Assassin's Creed 2 for just £2.93. Use my link found at the top of the description or in the pinned comment below and purchase any game in order to help out the channel while saving yourself some money on games. Now let's get back to the video. I started by taking a look at the PC port in order to see if it was as bad as I remembered. This PC port has fouled me heavily before, as crashing at random points is not uncommon. Crashing isn't the end of the world, however in my last playthrough of the game, not only did it crash, but every time I loaded that save, it would crash again. I was locked out of progress in the game anymore, so my playthrough ended there, and since then, I've never really come back to the game. I've played this game many times on consoles before and never experienced the amount of crashes that I do with a PC port. Fortunately though, since then and now, the ability to play these PS3 and Xbox 360 versions through emulators is now entirely possible. Before we get into that though, let's first get this PC port up and running with a few essential things. First off, there's a 1.1 patch that you can install using the link in the description. This patch removes the 30 FPS cap, adds the ability to turn on and off some extra features, and improves the view distance. Then you need to alter something in the config. The config of the game can be found by going to your app data folder. Simply put %app data% into your Windows start menu and then hit enter. There you need to go back one folder and go into the local folder, Activision, and then Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Use any text editor that you'd like to open this config file, and we're going to be putting in the 3 lines at the end here. These will be in the description. All you need to change here is video W and video H to your monitor's resolution, but keep video hertz and CPU count to these values no matter your PC specs. What these 3 commands do in combination is help a lot with stuttering. It does mean you'll be playing in exclusive full screen and at a frame rate cap of 60 FPS, but we'll get to why that's important in a sec. Alt-tabbing is going to be slower in this exclusive full screen mode, but older games like this suffer a lot when playing in windowed. You can try it if you want to by setting this to 1 instead of 0, and then using a program like Borderless Gaming to get rid of the window bar. It works, but again, introduces some stuttering. Now you can remove the 60Hz line in order to get an uncapped experience, but for missions with timers like the gas station drive-by one will be almost impossible to complete. You can leave the 60Hz line here and play with 60 FPS, or you can remove the line and play uncapped, but you will have to cap the frame rate back to 60 when you reach missions like this. I tried upping the limit to 120 FPS, but this made Spidey stutter during swings, so I quickly reverted back to 60. Technically 60 isn't perfect either, as anything over 30 breaks mechanics. 60 is only however slightly above this cap, so nothing game breaking should happen. If you have a 60Hz monitor as well, there's no reason to go above this. Lastly, if you're desperate for more frames, you can use something like lossless scaling in order to give you a smoother frame rate. This will use fake frames to get the game from 60 to 120 FPS, which means you won't be breaking any of the game mechanics. This is the safer option to go with, but of course won't feel as smooth as true 120 FPS. I have a whole video dedicated to exploring this software, so if you want to check that out, then you can use the card in the top right now. Now let's finally move on to talking about frame rates and discuss the biggest letdown of the port, and that's the graphics. The game has no graphics options, like none at all, meaning no matter how powerful your hardware is, everything is locked in place. If you think about the presets that are in most PC games that range from low to ultra, this game is locked at about low or medium at best. All of the post-processing effects, for example, are completely missing from this port. If you compare this to something like the Xbox 360 version, you'll see glowing parts like the vulture's feathers look extremely stripped back and basic. The gamma is also just so high by default. You can turn it down to low, which helps a bit, but it makes everything seem almost washed out. Low, medium, and high brightness just seem to have different trade-offs. It would have been nice to have a setting between low and medium here, but I think depending on your display, just go with anything but the high setting. Also, there's absolutely no anti-aliasing on this port, so if you're playing at anything under 4K, you're going to get some harsh, jaggy edges. Now, there are a ton of ways to bring anti-aliasing back into a game. The most simplest is probably going to be your Nvidia or AMD control panel, but the most universal option that will work for everyone is ReShade. You just need to point the installation to your game and then choose DirectX 9 when asked, and also when it asks about effects, my recommendation would be to choose the Marty's Immersive Shaders. This pack has a great SMAA anti-aliasing shader within it. If you however have your own anti-aliasing shader in mind, then by all means use that one, but if you're unsure, I would recommend this one. Once you've installed it and you're in game, you press the home key to open the menu and enable the anti-aliasing shader. You can also tick the performance mode box at the bottom if you need to. This mod removes the ability to tinker the settings of any shader, which is fine for anti-aliasing, but I think adding something like levels helps this game out a lot. If you tick the level shader and then set the white point to 255 and change the black point to something around 15, the change is subtle, but it helped out a lot with the general washed out look of the game. Not only is this port pretty bad, but unlike other older games, there are no mods or tweaks that I could find that really fix anything. What's not a terrible port though is the PS3 port. We can get this running on the RPCS3 emulator pretty easily. This emulator has improved tremendously over the years, and it's at a point where almost 70% of the PS3's library is fully playable start to finish, and this also includes Web of Shadows. Using this emulator is really user-friendly. The link where you can download it from the official website will be down in the description. They have a really nice quick start guide there which will help you out if you're totally new, but setting up an emulator is out of the scope for today's video. So have a look there or for a YouTube tutorial if you need help getting things running. Now before you start the game, inside the GPU settings, you want to make sure Z cull accuracy is set to relaxed. Then I recommend you set the resolution scale to 1080p or higher, depending on how well your PC can handle it. Using FSR on output scaling will sharpen the image quite a bit. The default 50% setting is a good starting point, but should be changed if you feel the game is over or under sharpened. Also, in advance, you can set the V-blank frequency to 120Hz in order to achieve 60 FPS gameplay. You can go higher to get 120 or 240 FPS, but again, I wouldn't recommend anything higher than 60 to avoid those bugs. I didn't mention this in the PC section, but there are texture pop-in issues with the PC port, and they're present here as well. To be honest though, this kind of texture pop-in was present on all the versions that I tested. It's also worth noting that this way of playing definitely demands stronger hardware. It's hard to pinpoint a specific rig that will work perfectly for you, so you might just need to test it and see how stable you can get the performance to be. What's great about the emulator though is that you can run the game at a lower resolution if you need to, and then upscale it using FSR. It's not going to work magic, but it can make a 720p image look a lot better on say a 1080p display. In the bottom left here, you'll see that it says compiling shaders. The key thing to note about this way of compiling shaders as you play is whenever you reach a new area of the game, you might encounter some stuttering for a minute or two. Of course, this game is set in one big open world, so it doesn't happen that often. I played this version of the game for about an hour, and to be honest, I really didn't have that much negative to say about it. I had a way better experience here than I did on PC, so I would definitely choose this option, albeit only if you have powerful enough hardware to run it. The other option you have though is the Xbox 360 version running on the Xenia emulator, specifically the Canary fork of the emulator. This one surprised me a lot because whilst the emulator is extremely basic and underdeveloped compared to others, it ran really well. The Xbox 360 port itself is also by far the best version of the game. It's got way better graphics with all of the post-processing effects that are missed in the PC version, it has really stable FPS, and from the short time that I played it, it didn't crash at all. The Xenia emulator is quite advanced to set up, so instead I would recommend getting something called Xenia Manager. This program essentially simplifies the setup and also lets you configure the emulator way easier. The link to the GitHub page will be in the description. You just have to extract everything from this zip archive into a folder and then open the desktop app. You'll see a welcome message where you just need to click Install Xenia Canary. It'll get you to create a profile within the Xenia emulator, and then you can close down the emulator to go back to the manager. You don't need to install the other two things here, so you can just close that down now. You can import your game by selecting the plus icon in the top right and then where the game's installed to. Now the settings I'd recommend you change before you start are as follows. Go Xenia settings and scroll down to internal display resolution. Unfortunately, this only lets you set resolutions that are officially supported by the game. For most games this is 720p, but luckily for Web of Shadows this is 1080p, so I recommend setting it to that. The only reason you would choose 720p here is of course if your PC cannot handle 1080p. Then we need to set the frame rate limit to 120 FPS. This is really confusing, but 120 FPS actually means 60 FPS. If you want say 30 FPS, then you would set this to 60. If you press F6 whilst you're in game, you'll also open up the post-processing tab. Don't bother with anti-aliasing here as it just looks bad. Instead, play with the resampling and sharpening options. I found that 1080p with this emulator looks surprisingly more blurry than the PS3 version did. You need to play with these sliders yourself as it's personal preference on how sharp you want your game to look. Like I said previously, I encountered texture pop-in and bugs in all versions that I tested. The Xbox 360 version definitely had less of it, but there was some crazy vertex explosion going on in a certain part of the city. I'm going to bet though this is caused by the emulator itself and is not present on the Xbox version. Depending on when you're watching this video, stuff like this might be fixed due to the rapid updates these emulators seem to get. Now although I couldn't get this version looking as sharp and clear as the PC or PS3 version, I would be inclined to choose this over the other options due to how better the actual visuals itself look. I think the main thing is just looking at them all side by side, the Xbox has a very clear, better contrast look to it. The others just look a bit washed out. Now what I usually do on this channel is give a sort of final verdict and go over which version I think you should play. But instead I'd like to do something different and give you pros and cons for each version and which situation I would pick one over the other. The reason I want to do this is because ultimately PC is a platform where many of you have wildly different configurations and setups, so what works for me may not work for you. Therefore I think this approach is a lot nicer for you all, but do let me know in the comments what you think. Let's start by taking a look at the PC version of the game. The pros are definitely the performance here. Whilst it's stuttery at worst, it's still natively running on your machine and therefore cannot be beat by any emulator. Emulator takes a lot of your CPU resources, and so by far, if you are on a low-end system, this port may be the only option for you, so I have to give it credit for that. Another pro would be the high resolution. Yes, of course, you can bump up the resolution within the PS3 emulator and upscale it using FSR in Xenia, but that does not beat having proper native resolution of your monitor in this version. I will say though, the sharpness on the PC version came pretty close to the PS3 emulator. Cons would be that this version has the weakest graphics of all the ports. It's by far the ugliest to look at. It's not terrible, but it's not good either. And since we're aiming for the most definitive experience, the Xbox version just offers way more effects that the devs intended to be there in the first place. There's also less controller support when compared to the emulator options. My Xbox One controller worked no problem, but if you want to use something like a PlayStation controller, then you'll need to use an X input wrapper like DS4 Windows to get working. There's also zero customizability or settings, which is a big letdown, especially because what we're stuck with here is low to medium looking settings. And lastly, really poor stability and crashing issues. Not only did I get 2 to 3 crashes whilst recording, but I've also, like I said, experienced a crash so bad that it lost all of my progress. And I'd hate to recommend a version to you guys only for you to lose tens of hours to a crash. Next is the PS3 version. A pro is definitely the emulator itself, RPCS free. It's stable, looks amazing, and almost perfectly emulates the port. Another one would be the ease of customizability. The settings of the emulator let you change so much, like controls and graphics. There's also of course really nice quality of life features like the built-in FSR support. This gives you great upscaling options for those of you that need those extra frames. Save states are a godsend as well. This game isn't old enough for them to be amazingly useful, but using them alongside the built-in save features help prevent a lot of frustration of losing progress. The emulator has a wide range of controller support as well, and supports both Xbox and PlayStation controllers natively, with a lot of configuration available. Lastly, the stability and performance was a bit more stable in my opinion. After the shaders were compiled, it was such a smooth experience and I didn't suffer any crashing at all. This makes me believe that this port is a lot more stable than the PC version. The cons would be the strong CPU that you might need in order to run this emulator. Not everyone has the luxury of powerful hardware, and whilst the requirements are not insane, anyone on a lower end system will definitely struggle. It also suffers from poor graphics like the PC version. I wouldn't say it's as bad as that version, but it's definitely not near the Xbox 360, and so the extra power that you need to run the emulator might not be overall worth it. Last up is the Xbox 360 version. It's the best graphically, you can't beat it. It's also the most stable. It might be similar to the PS3 port in terms of this, but again, no crashing or weirdness despite that one emulator related bug that I called out. Due to the Xbox 360 being way less complicated to emulate, it's also a little less taxing on your machine than the PS3 emulator. Xenia is still very far behind, so its performance isn't flawless like it should be, but it's still really good. There's also wide controller support like there is on RPCSS 3. The cons are that the emulator is extremely basic and offers very little customization. Things like FSR and the ability to change the resolution are there, but not as developed as other emulators. Also, you're probably going to encounter minor glitches that are due to the emulator being underdeveloped. So I think it's worth setting your expectations if you're going to choose this option. Overall, for people on low-end systems, the PC version is by far the worst, but maybe the only option. I would still give the Xbox 360 version a try though, as it's not as demanding as the PS3 version. If you're playing on a medium to high-end system however, then the Xbox 360 version is by far the best both graphically and in terms of stability. It's a bummer that I couldn't get it to look as sharp as the PS3 version, but it still looks great on a 1080p monitor. If you're on anything above a 1080p monitor and would love to have the higher resolution and are willing to sacrifice graphics, then the PS3 version is a lot more stable than the PC version and offered really smooth gameplay. I think the PC version should just be avoided at all costs, so that's why I would choose the PS3 version over that one. Hopefully all of this answered the question that we asked at the start of the video, and if it did, I would appreciate if you subscribe to the channel as it helps out a lot. This game was a huge part of my childhood, and having gone through all these versions, it's really sad to realise that there's no modding scene to try and bring the Xbox effects to PC, or fix the crashing. It's really great though that emulation has come so far that we can choose it over the broken PC port when the console ones are better. I want to explore the other Spider-Man games and see if there is more we can explore and do to those, so if you want to see that, let me know what Spider-Man game I should cover next on the channel. I'm also launching a Discord channel from the moment that this video goes live. About a week ago the majority said that you would like one, so I thought I'd give it a shot. If you're interested, then the link for that will be in the description below. You all voted yes to wanting to see some streams as well, so I thought that there would be no harm in giving it a go. I'll be live here on YouTube as well as Twitch playing this game right after the video goes live. It'll be a good place to chill and ask me anything if you want to come along. A big thanks to these members on screen here, these people keep the channel alive. You can do the same for just £1 a month here on YouTube by clicking the join button below or using the link in the description. There's the option to do the same exact thing but on Patreon as well if you prefer that platform. Link is there also. If you go ahead and become a member, not only will you be supporting me, but you'll get early access to my videos as well as your name featured here. If you enjoyed the video, then how about you check out my deep dive into lossless scaling, which is the program that we mentioned earlier about doubling your frame rate. Also, if you're into Marvel games, then how about you watch the last Best Way to Play episode, which was on the obscure but brilliant PS2 game based on The Punisher. See you over there.